So apologies for being late, and thanks to Soraya for being thrown in the deep end and filling the gap in. So I think you've met Soraya, so just introduce myself quickly. Dawn Woodward, I work for DEFRA, and I'm head of resources and waste management policy. I've been in the resources and waste team. Sorry, is that right? Okay, sorry. I've been in the resources and waste team for 5.5 years now, and in DEFRA for 20 years. I did have a couple of previous lives before that, and one of those was running a pub for Whitbreads during the 80s and early 90s. So I'm slightly used to what you're doing here, although sustainability wasn't quite so high on the list at that point, but we did return all of our glass bottles. So I think today we're going to talk to you mainly about the new single-use plastic bans. I thought I'd start off with a bit of an introduction into our resources and waste strategy and what we're trying to do overall, of which the single-use plastic bans and our plastics work are but a part. So let's just go forward. Hang on, next one. So in December 2018, government published our resources and waste strategy, and I actually joined the team just as we were halfway through working with that. So was pleased to be there to see that actually get published. And this built on the government's 25-year environment plan, where it pledged to leave the environment in a better condition for the next generation. And at that time, it was our first significant government statement in this area for almost a decade. And the main things, and this is what the whole sustainability is all about, is about moving towards a more circular economy, helping society to reduce, reuse, and recycle more. And it's got about 100 commitments to be delivered over the lifetime of the strategy. When I say lifetime, we didn't put a time frame on the strategy. We said we would review it in 5 years, and we've been doing that through our environmental improvement plan, which I'll talk about in a moment. Some of the significant commitments in the strategy include collection and packaging reforms, simpler recycling, and extended producer responsibility for packaging. I'm not really going to talk about those today, but if there are questions at the end, I can try and answer, but if not, we can take them away. So what will the strategy do? So it's going to combine actions we take now with commitments for the longer term coming years. So we've already done things through that in terms of the plastics space in particular, where we restricted the supply of plastic straws, banned the supply of plastic stemmed cotton buds, and we banned the supply of plastic stirrers. A couple of years ago, we increased the plastic carrier bag charge. So they're things we've been doing. The strategy encompasses much wider than just that. It covers things like waste crime, how we design products, and the main aim is to maximise the value of all of our precious natural resources and to minimise the amount of waste we produce and the impact that that has on the environment. So of course we know there will always be some waste, but how much can we reduce that? And that's very much in our reduce, reuse, recycle mantra. So we set out 5 strategic ambitions when we published the strategy. You can read those up there. I won't read them all over. I think the two most relevant ones for today are to work towards all plastic packaging placed on the market being recyclable, reusable, or compostable by 2025. We put compostable in when we wrote the strategy with evidence, and as we do more work, we now don't generally support compostable plastic. That's not to say we don't support compostable material, but not generally compostable plastic. There are some really niche uses where you couldn't possibly recycle, but on the whole, we prefer to see things that are either refillable, reusable, or recyclable, and keeping that material in the market. And The other one was to eliminate avoidable plastic waste over the lifetime of the 25-year environment plan. And we're working hard to do that, including the UK is a leading member of some United Nations work that is ongoing at the moment to introduce a legally binding treaty to tackle plastic pollution. And in fact, I don't know if Soraya said anything at the beginning, but some of our team are actually out in Nairobi at the moment on the early stages of negotiating that strategy, that commitment. And that commitment is proposed to be delivered by 2040. Some challenging discussions, as you can imagine, when you've got global discussions, and some countries aren't quite so keen to move as fast as others. But that's our strategic commitments. And then there's just a few things on here. Many of these relate to the wider collection and packaging reforms. But the thing on here, which Soraya is going to talk about in a moment, is our new restrictions on certain single-use plastic bans, which came into force on the 1st of October. Also of interest will probably be our deposit return scheme, which we're planning to implement from October 2025. I mentioned that when I ran pubs, sustainability wasn't quite so high. Well, it wasn't quite at the forefront. I think we did a lot of things in those days that were more sustainable anyway, just wasn't talked about as much. And I always remember at that time you could still take your bottles back to the off licence for a 5p return, and we used to have children jumping our back wall to actually take away our beer bottles to go and get their deposits back. So we're hoping that the deposit return scheme will lead to something like that in picking up litter. So just before I hand over to Soraya, just wanted to say a little bit more about plastic, in the sense that we don't want to demonise plastic. It's a very useful material, and I think there is a danger that we could move to other alternatives that have equal problems, whether it's pollution or they're not sustainable or the carbon that's used to produce them. So that's why we really are looking to, our bans have looked to eliminate problematic single-use plastics where we think there are alternatives, rather than demonise plastic as a whole. There are some really great examples like plastic milk bottles, which can be recycled and recycled and recycled, providing they're returned properly. So we're not trying to demonise plastic, but we are trying to tackle that problematic stuff, especially those things that escape into the environment and end up polluting either on land or in sea. So on that, I will hand over to Soraya, that's going to talk a bit about the plastic bans.
Thanks very much, Dawn. I really enjoyed watching watching from the chairs, and then also with the headset. It's quite a fancy experience. Let me just check, because I think there was a slide that was jumped over. Oh yeah, this is just a little... Thank you. Thanks very much. This is just a little drawing of our environmental improvement plan. All right, now for the bit that you might find particularly relevant to your sustainability and events area. So the government brought in restrictions and bans on certain single-use plastics. It came into force on the 1st of October. And we announced it in January as well, to allow businesses to begin to use up old stock. But some of the restrictions and bans are on single-use plastic plates, bowls and trays, all single-use plastic cutlery, all single-use polystyrene drinks containers and food containers, and all single-use plastic balloon sticks. And this is in addition to the earlier bans that Dawn mentioned. So just a bit more detail as well. It became an offence to supply these items, and then there are a few of these items as well that it became an offence to supply them to end users. So the thing that can make sense of this as well is that, for example, plates, trays and bowls, you won't be able to get plastic ones anymore at the supermarket for your own events, for example, or through suppliers. But you will probably still find them in places on the high street, for example, that sell ready-made food, because that counts as packaging. So I wanted to make sure that these bans align with the extended producer responsibility for packaging reforms that will come in later. And the packaging will be covered off in those areas, and so we didn't want them to cause any trouble, effectively. So again, I guess I'll touch on some of the previous measures and some little key takeaways, good things that have come out of them. So as part of the carrier bag charge, there's actually been quite a huge drop in the number of single-use plastic bags that have been found on beaches, which is really, really good to see. Plastic cotton buds now no longer feature in the top 10 most common beach litter items, although I wonder what the other ones are, but let's not think about that now. Then there's also microbeads, plastic microbeads that are added to cosmetic products usually. They were banned as well, and with the ban, there's been billions of these beads that have now been saved from going into our waterways and into the ocean. The final thing as well is we've brought in a plastic packaging tax. So plastic that doesn't have 30% recycled material is required to pay a tax per ton on it. So again, sort of touching on something that Don was talking about when we think about things like biodegradable, bio-based, compostable plastics. What is plastic in the first place? So this might be a bit helpful to give more background on the position that we have. We define plastic as a polymer that has been chemically modified. That is a sort of headline. As part of it, we collected a lot of evidence in our consultation around bio-based, biodegradable, and compostable plastics to form a policy position that effectively says that there isn't that much evidence to say that bio-based, biodegradable, and compostable plastics are any better than the plastics that we have now that are often fossil-based and non-biodegradable. And the reason why is because they're still plastics. So they still behave like plastics. A lot of them won't biodegrade. Even the ones that say biodegradable and compostable often won't. And when they do, there's evidence to show that they biodegrade or decompose into microplastics, which is quite a concerning finding. So what is different, though, is compostable materials or biodegradable materials that aren't made of plastic, and there's sort of divide to clarify between the two of them. So there are a lot of materials that aren't plastic that are biodegradable and compostable, and potentially you might, instead of single-use plastic cutlery, for example, you might explore buying wooden cutlery or just paper that isn't coated with any plastic lining. And these might be positive alternatives. So again, these single-use plastic bans do not cover off all plates, cutlery, balloon sticks, etc. You can still get them, but just in these alternative materials. So we try to encourage businesses to use reusable alternatives where possible. Obviously, we know there are challenges with that, but we like to think of the reduce, reuse, recycle as a hierarchy. So ideally reduce, then reuse, and then see if you can find a recyclable alternative. This might be of interest as well. There's a business initiative in the UK called the UK Plastics Pact, which is run by WRAP, an organization which works on packaging, and they essentially try to bring together stakeholders across the value chain. So this includes government, businesses, and NGOs, and they want to ideally promote a circular economy for plastics. So they have quite a few targets which they have already made some progress in meeting, and we'd encourage any of you, if you're business owners, to see if you can engage with the UK Plastics Pact. Might be relevant for you. So now about sustainability at events. So there is quite helpful guidance that has been developed by the Environment Agency on preventing plastic pollution which is linked here. I'm sure we can share it as well. If there's going to be a little email at the end, and you can email us, and we can send that on to you if you're not able to find it otherwise. But effectively, the idea is, again, in line with the waste hierarchy of reduce, reuse, recycle. Ideally, try and see, can you avoid using plastic? Can you avoid using these single-use plastic materials? Then thinking about other ways that you can fill the gap that they would use. If that's not possible, then reduction, and then see if you can source more sustainable materials, then looking into reuse or refill options, and then looking into recycled options. So if you're organizing an event, a really good way of trying to make sure that you are as sustainable as possible, at least from our top tips would be, talk about plastics early on with anyone that you're working with, any of the businesses that you're working with. Where are their suppliers getting their plastics from? Where are you getting it from? It should be up there as an issue, ideally. Speak with catering. Often they're the ones that supply a lot of single-use plastic material. Then think about decorations. A lot of decorations are single-use. They're not used again, and they're just made of plastics. And is there any way of thinking about, or any way that you can source alternative decorations that might not just be for single use and not just be plastic that will be then thrown in the bin? And then a final thing is waste management. Do people know how to best manage the unavoidable waste? And just a good question to reflect on. Is a little QR code here, so you can sign up to our newsletter that will keep you updated on all things resources and waste. And then there's our email there as well, the plastics.consultation@defra.gov.uk, if you have any further questions. Thank you.
I'm back. Awesome, thank you so much. That was so informative. I was on a panel here earlier, and I was like, oh, I don't think the government's looking at us as an industry. I don't think they care. And actually, you do. So it just goes to show we need to be paying attention. I'm going to get into some of these questions here. So if you pick up your microphones on your chairs, hopefully you can help us answer some of these. One of them was particularly interesting for me as a badge supplier, so I will get to that one. But let's start with this one that's been upvoted. It says, interested to know more about waste crime. Does that apply to events? Can you give some examples of where criminal charges have been successful as a deterrent for waste crime?
Oh, no, that's a good one. I wouldn't say that we've got much evidence of waste crime at events. So within my policy portfolio, I do have a team that leads on waste crime, and also the team that leads on litter and fly tipping. So some of the most common waste crime, as we would call it, is fly tipping, whether that's low-level fly tipping or whether it's the more serious and organised crime end, where you can have lorry loads of stuff. So we've got the whole range of things, and depending on the seriousness, it's either enforced by the Environment Agency, who enforce the most serious end of waste crime. They also provide all the waste permits for all of the activities, and then the more low-level, although still very irritating, sort of the low-level fly tipping and litter, etc., are all enforced by local authorities. As far as events go, I think the thing that would be most noticeable is making sure that whoever you are asking to take your waste away, that you do check their waste carrier's license and that they are legally registered, and that they're not taking your money and then not disposing of it properly but going and dumping it somewhere they shouldn't be. So I think that's the most relevant thing here. But in terms of, there are people that have been sent to prison. We've had proceeds of crime. Environment Agency are quite successful with proceeds of crime on prosecutions, and if people are fly tipping, we can also take away their vehicles, as well as fixed penalty notices. So there's a whole range, and we do publish all the statistics on that. Again, just email us if you want some more information.
That's phenomenal. And I think, for us, I think you hit the nail on the head there of like asking our suppliers, as we're trying to diversify our suppliers and find people that are more local, maybe that leads us to people that aren't as established as the people that we already know. So questions that we didn't have to previously ask, maybe it's time to start asking some of those questions. This one's of particular interest. Not this one. Can we get a copy of the slides? I think, can they get a copy of the slides? Yes, I would have thought so. Okay, so here, interested in your view on reusable plastic name badges. Now, that's a big thing for us. This is paper mostly, but there are more of those kind of fold-over name badges that are more plasticky and definitely have something in there. We work for a charity, have limited resource, and those we have today are too expensive. Oh, dear. Okay, anyway, I didn't say I work for a name badge company, did I? Anyway, so there is plastic. I mean, even in the lanyard, I don't know what's in there. I don't know, are the lanyards
It would be
probably,
plastic within the polyester,
so.
yeah.
So that happens in our industry a lot, like thousands of people with name badges and plastic in their lanyards. What's the thought on that then?
So shall I go first and then I'll let Soraya come in? So I think, try to avoid, the paper is a great idea. Lanyards, yeah, challenging, but how can they be recycled? I think that's the other thing to think of. I mean, reusable plastic badges are great, but they're only reusable or recyclable if someone does hand them in at the end. So, in government events now, where we do still have name badges and we have the simple plastic reusable ones, they're always at us with boxes as we're leaving to make sure we're handing those in. But if people don't hand them in, then they're not reusable and they're not recyclable. So I think it's just thinking, there will always be some occasions where you do need to use these things, but just think about, is there an alternative? And if you are using reusable or recyclable, how do you ensure that you actually collect those back?
Don, you kind of covered everything off there, but the only thing I would say is it's hard when you're doing individually branded lanyards. So these aren't going to be reusable because it's made specifically for this event. But if you think about, well, is there any way that am I okay with sacrificing the branding element to make sure that it's reusable? That would be an interesting question to think about. And then obviously these are quite very interesting and fancy and very useful. But the older versions where you have the plastic that you literally stick the paper into that you print out, and then you can reuse that outside plastic bit each time, and then the inside paper bit that has the name and the QR code and everything, you can just put that in the recycling bin. Even sometimes those older solutions might offer something better alternatives potentially.
I think that's probably the biggest challenge right there, because everybody wants their badges to look nicer, better. There are beacons inside or tracking inside certain badge types that it's just part of kind of what we do. So I think that is going to be a big challenge. I will give the lanyards a shout out, because I will say these lanyards probably are reusable in that they don't talk about Event Tech Live, for example. So if you want to pick up your lanyard and use it for another event, I certainly tend to. And what one organisation did is they made our lanyards really pretty, shiny, bejeweled lanyards that I have at home. My kids love them. I love them. I will use them again because they're quite nice. So
yeah, I mean, just to add to that, when I went out to United Nations in Nairobi a few years ago, they were selling beaded lanyards made by local people, which was making money for them. I use that all the time now at work, and in fact our colleagues that are out there now are on order to actually buy some for others to bring them back. So there are alternatives that you can do, but appreciate they come at a cost as well. And for your event, doing something that's useful for everyone to use for everything else might not be the most important.
I love that, and I think that fits into that bottom question of, can you share some other examples of plastic alternatives at events like lanyards, name badges and signage? So I think you've kind of helped us to do that. But I love that in particular because sustainability is not always just about reducing carbon and all that. It's about giving back as well. It's about looking after the local community and leaving the space that you went to better than it was when you got there. So if there's something you can do for the community at the same time, I love that. It's a really nice example. Do you happen to have any other examples of good things, good practices that you've seen where people have made a swap or a change?
So I suppose not so much from a work perspective, but lucky enough to be at Wimbledon tennis last year, and I know Wimbledon now, you pay, like a lot of large events, you pay £1 for your reusable glass. You top that up throughout the event. At the end of the event, you can return it and get your £1 back. Obviously, at the end of a long day at Wimbledon, most people were actually just putting them down by the bins. And again, a little bit like the very entrepreneurial children in my pub days, there were people going around collecting them up and taking them back for deposits. They actually limited it to 10 returns per person, because people, I think, were making quite a lot of money from everybody else's.
Nice. There isn't this question in here. If anyone does have any other questions and you want to put your hand up, by all means, I will come to you with a microphone. Whilst you're thinking of those, I'm going to ask a question for us about swag. Now, we're also an industry where, we've been thinking about our swag. Do you know what I mean by swag? Tchotchkes and all sorts of stuff.
Yes.
But do people really want? You have to challenge yourself. But we like at these places going around to people's booths and picking up things. But we're all very conscious now of, should we be producing that? And sometimes it's a pen, sometimes it's a badge, sometimes, God knows, there's a million things you could produce. What's your thought on swag in general of us? And for me, it's about the production. It's produced en masse a lot.
You want to go first?
Yeah, it's tough because, again, we understand the desire of businesses to have things for people to take home and remember them by. But I think there are alternatives out there, if possible. Even when you have little printout poster handouts, you can get them. You can get ones that are lined in plastic and that aren't made of recycled material. But if you think about buying ones that are recycled and perhaps not lined in plastic and more easily recyclable, that's already a positive change. Things that people can reuse as well are always quite good. I think I've received things like reusable coffee cups as well. If we recommended that to everyone, that would probably be not great either. But looking at things like that, or obviously tote bags is one that's really taken off recently. But there are other ways that you can reach out to your potential buyers or to consumers of your product. So it's hard, but thinking about maybe digital alternatives as well could be a new frontier in a way.
Yeah, thanks. I wouldn't add much to that. We don't personally have business cards anymore. We haven't within DEFRA for quite a long time. We do have some cards which we unfortunately haven't got with us today, but we do have some cards that have the QR code and things on for signing up to the newsletter that you can also plant, and they will grow. They've got seeds embedded in them. So, there are, I think, lots of companies coming in with those sorts of things. I think the main thing I would say is, as Sarai was saying, if you are doing swag, obviously it's got to be relevant to you, but also, is it reusable? Most of us use pens for a while if they're of a reasonable quality that they will actually work. If they're one of the pens that, you put them in your bag and they crack, and then, they're not really a lot of use, are they? So where you do want swag, is it what your customers are looking for? And is it actually something that has a use after they've taken it away in their tote bag, which does have a use?
On an earlier panel, we were talking about cost, because some people think that being sustainable is more costly. And actually, they said, one of the ladies said that, well, let's say you produced a higher quality, more sustainable pen, for example, but you produce less of them, then suddenly it's not costing you so much because you've just made a conscious decision to say, I'm going to go for good quality because it's useful, as you've said, but actually I'll make a few less. I don't think you're going to lose too much, and actually you'll probably save some money because you thought about it rather than just mass producing some nonsense. Any questions from the audience? You have government officials here. There we go. I'm running over.
Thank you. I did actually just put it on Slido, but ran out of characters.
Sorry, can't hear.
Is that better?
You have to normally eat these mics. Oh, sorry, it's on there.
And put your headphones on. So apologies, I put it on Slido, but I've got the opportunity to say. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on, there are now lots and lots of bamboo alternatives for event-related things like lanyards and serveware and swag, which sounds great, but I'm just wondering what's your thoughts on that? I think it has quite a large carbon footprint. Does it actually biodegrade? Is it mixed with plastic? Yeah, anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, and that applies to all alternatives, whether they're alternatives to plastic or alternative plastics such as bio-based. You know, is it a good idea to be growing crops or, you know, using, I know bamboo does sort of grow quite mad, but yeah, we are looking, and one of the things that we're keen and working with a number of academic institutions in looking at is whole life cycle assessments of products. So we're not there yet, it's early days in the research, but looking to make sure that alternatives don't have a worse sort of overall life cycle assessment in terms of the carbon it takes to produce them, and then what it does actually, how they are disposed of. So yeah, the jury's out still a little bit. We're trying to gather evidence on some of these alternatives.
I'll go for it.
What I would add is as well, with bamboo, I think, so a huge issue is the mix as well. So there'll be it won't be raw. Well, first of all, it won't be raw bamboo. It'll be chemically modified, and then it effectively becomes a plastic and behaves like one, or it can do. It depends on the material, to be fair. But and then the other one is it can be mixed with plastic all the time, which makes both the plastic bit almost impossible to recycle, and there's no benefit to the bamboo being there. It's basically just greenwashing. And I think there's also safety dangers as well with that. So recently, the Food Standards Agency has suspended the sale of composite plastic bamboo foodware because of the worry that the plastic chemicals might actually seep through the bamboo or also the other plant-based components of the material, and it actually poses a danger to human health. So they're investigating that at the moment. But yeah, it's a bit of a minefield.
Yeah, as Soraya says, it is a real minefield, and you know, it's hard to sometimes keep up with technological advances. We're trying, we're a fairly small team. And I think the other thing Soraya just mentioned, greenwashing. We have been working with the Competition Markets Authority that have been doing work on greenwashing, and also says the Food Standards Agency. I mean, we know, for example, you know, there's an issue with food contact film. So, you know, you can't have that film with recycled content at the moment until it gets better. There might be some more, like if chemical recycling comes on board and proves worthwhile. But yeah, there are lots of issues. It's a bit of a minefield, which is like trying to say we're not demonising all plastic. It's not get rid of all plastic and find alternatives, because sometimes a good PET plastic bottle or plastic something that can be recycled is better than some of the alternatives.
Brilliant. Any more? Thank you.
Thank you for this very interesting conference. I just had a question about carpet. I also put it on Slido, but it disappeared. Carpet, some companies claim to produce 100% recyclable carpet for events. I visited a factory that shows that actually you cannot remake a carpet once it's been used because there are micro particles in it that prevents to remake another type of carpet, but it produces little plastic that is used then in some to create a part in cars or things like that. What do we think about it, and what should we check when we talk to carpet providers?
Thank you. I'm not an expert on carpet, but we do have, I know one of our other teams, our waste prevention team, has been looking into textiles more broadly, recyclable textiles and recyclable carpet. You're absolutely right. And there are companies now that will take carpet for recycling, but there is, as you say, there's a challenge to how much can actually be recycled. But I'm not going to claim to know exactly that because I'm not the expert. But we do have work going on around textiles and carpet that's actually looking at what can be done. And I can take that one away. If you want to email us on that plastic consultation email, I'll find a bit more detail about the carpet recycling schemes, etc.
The only thing I'd add on that and all other questions around sort of potentially novel but recyclable items is there someone that you're going to give it to that will actually recycle it? So you wouldn't be able to put it in the recycling bins for municipal recycling. So you need to know where it's going to go at the end, and if they'll take it. And often, because it's so hard to recycle, they'll ask they'll actually ask for money to recycle it. So are you willing to not only pay more for the recyclability, but then pay for it to get recycled? And then, obviously there's questions around how much of it can actually be recycled at the end of the day. But we don't know that much about that, unfortunately. But yeah, it's an interesting question, interesting problem.
So we've probably got about 1 minute left, and I want to steal that minute to ask a final question. So we're always talking about standards, guidance, policies. If you didn't sit here today and tell us about bamboo mixed with plastic, we probably wouldn't know. We wouldn't know half the stuff we know now because you're here. What is the opportunity to work alongside you as a department and an industry that, some people don't see us? How do we come together with your department to make sure that we can put out guidance for everybody so that we all know what to do when we're putting our events together?
So I think the best way is through our Resources and Waste newsletter. We've also recently started, we were when I joined, we were a team of about 30 people that were introducing the whole of the Resources and Waste strategy. At the time it was a strategy. We're now up to just over 200 people with everyone that's doing something. We've still never got enough resource, of course, I would say that. But yeah, so I think we've got a communications and engagement team now, who are responsible for sending us here today. But we are starting to do some business forums, and I think the best way is to sign up for this newsletter. You'll then find out all of the forums that are going on, but equally, if you email that inbox, that's mine and Soraya's team that are looking at that. We can get you some contacts, but it would be good to have some industry representation on these business readiness forums.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for joining us and being interactive and asking questions and listening to me sing about single-use plastics at the beginning. It wasn't really singing. It was kind of talking. But I do appreciate you. Thank you so much. And join us for the next one if you can.